That's the sound of a Lockheed Constellation taking off with its 4 massive Wright-manufactured engines at full power. Music to an airplane lover's ears. My name is Don. I worked for TWA for 31 years, and I have a great time being a volunteer at the museum. I'm looking forward to telling you about what many call TWA's golden age of travel aboard the last generation of its propeller-driven aircraft. That era in many ways was defined by the Lockheed Constellation. The upper portion of this case displays models and photographs of the 4 major versions of the Constellations flown by TWA. With its unique triple tail and sleek curved fuselage, TWA flew this magnificent airplane commercially from 1946 through 1967. And here's something you might find interesting. In 1944, 2 years before TWA took delivery of its first Constellation, TWA's owner, Howard Hughes, and its president, Jack Fry, flew a military version of the Constellation from Burbank, California to Washington, D.C. in record time of just under 7 hours. While the purpose of this flight was to deliver the aircraft to the Army Air Forces, Hughes wanted to be sure his airline signature was on this historic event. He even had the airplane temporarily painted in TWA colors, just for good measure. In addition to its domestic duties, the Constellation was the workhorse of TWA's early international fleet. It was a Constellation that flew TWA's first commercial international flight. On February the 5th, 1946, the Star of Paris left New York's LaGuardia Airport at 1:21 p.m. After stops in Gander, Newfoundland, and Shannon, Ireland, it arrived in Paris at 8:57 the next morning. TWA eventually flew more than 150 Constellations over a 23-year period. Improvements in performance, power, and range accompanied each successive version. As newer and more powerful Constellations were produced, non-stop travel to many faraway destinations became a reality. The Constellation on the right side of the shelf is the Model 1649. With a maximum range in excess of 6,000 miles, it could fly non-stop between the west coast of the United States and points in Europe in 16 to 22 hours. Introduced by TWA in 1957, the L-1649 would also have the distinction of being the last propeller-driven aircraft acquired by TWA. As you're exploring our museum, you'll see many models and photographs of the Connie. You might want to take special note of the exotic locations some are flying over, such as the photograph on the upper left showing an early TWA Constellation flying over the pyramids of Egypt. You'll also catch glimpses of entertainment stars and heads of state standing outside or sitting on board a TWA Constellation. It was quite a plane. Perhaps we've piqued your interest in the Connie. If so, why not take one up for a spin? Well, sort of. In our next gallery is our Constellation Flight Simulator. Feel free to give it a try. There are 2 other propeller aircraft in this case below the Connies. First is the Douglas DC-4. TWA's fleet of 19 were all former military C-54 aircraft, converted for commercial passenger service. Unpressurized and outclassed by the Constellation, the DC-4 saw both domestic and international service, including cargo operations, between its introduction in 1945 and its retirement in the early 1960s. Among its more notable roles in TWA's history, a DC-4 was used to operate international survey flights in 1945, prior to the official beginning of international passenger service the following year. To the right of the DC-4 is the Martin 404. It was first flown by TWA in 1952. Along with its predecessor, the Martin 202A, it was brought into the fleet to begin the large-scale retirement of TWA's legendary DC-3s. The Martins were used on short-haul segments within the United States. On a final note, I'd like to direct your attention to the photograph below the Constellation model on the right. That gentleman in the cockpit is my dad, Donald Albert Lukey. He worked for TWA from 1940 through 1959. As shown in the picture, he was a flight engineer aboard a Lockheed Constellation. On June the 26th, 1959, my dad lost his life when TWA Flight 891 crashed after takeoff from Milan, Italy. The accident occurred in the town of Olgiate Olona, Italy. I've been there and can tell you the residents are wonderful people, and they have respectfully and compassionately memorialized the event. You know, many TWA employees were family. My dad and I are examples. But the TWA family extended well beyond that, to our co-workers, the millions of passengers we flew, and in this case, the residents of Olgiate Olona. If you'd like to know more about Flight 891, there's a book on display in our Flight 800 Memorial Room with remembrances of the flight and my personal trip to Olgiate Olona. Thanks for joining me in TWA's golden age of propeller aircraft. As our constellation fades into the distance, a new era is about to begin, the jet age.